Lions take the first test, but they were unconvincing in the second half. My name's Mark. Let's talk rugby. Okay, so first test is done. Earlier today, I did a short version. So if you're looking for a bite-sized, kind of review of the game, go have a look at that. It's only 7 minutes. This one is going to be probably around 40 odd minutes or so. So you've been warned from the start. But in here, we're obviously going to go a little bit more in depth on things, and we're also going to do a recap of the game itself. So let's start with the recap, and then we'll talk about some stats. We'll talk about the teams as well. So right from the off, we got Tyg Byrne getting over the ball, winning a penalty, and this performance, especially in the first half from the Lions, felt like players whose position was questioned a little bit. Like I certainly questioned Byrne being picked in that back row, kind of vindicated those selections by Andy Farrell by just delivering. Like Byrne, I thought was excellent, and he just set the tone for everyone else. Straight away, right off the kickoff, over the ball, wins a penalty, and the Lions really in the first half certainly didn't look back from there. It's straight in front, and it's a pretty straightforward kick. So Russell pops it over for 3 points to nil to the Lions. Russell then with a nice kick in behind. Looks like it's going for 50-22, and then Potter kind of helps it out, trying to keep it in play. Doesn't kind of work out for him. But he'd nothing to lose really, because it's kind of 50-22. Anyway, the Lions, they got a line out in decent position. Off the maul, they spread it. Freeman and Curry carry well, but then McWright gets over the ball to win a penalty as Itoje was off his feet. Thought McWright was really good in that back row. And Self and Wilson, kind of the two standouts for me in the pack for the Wallabies. Then Lions come again from a free at a scrum. Lovely touch from Russell to put Sheehan through a half gap into the 22. Genge then carries well before the Lions shifted again. Russell, nice long pass across the front of the posts and straight into the breadbasket for Tupolatu, who was over to score. Just pure class from Russell there, converted for 10 points to nil. Lions then at that stage winning the aerial battle. Thought Lowe and Keenan were to the fore in that. Freeman was getting up there, challenging, but his handling wasn't as good as Lowe and Keenan. It's certainly early on. Now we did have errors from certainly Keenan on the try, although I think for that one it was just two really good guys in the air competing. But yeah, I thought they were the more solid for the Lions. Keenan then feeds Lowe. He's free on the left. He breaks into 22. Nice fend. Then back inside to Jones, who fights his way over, but we have a TMO check because it looks like he's been tackled and then gets back up without actually releasing the ball. And after the check, it's given us no try. And great defense there from Jorgensen, to actually get that tackle in there as well and prevent them from scoring the try. But also, it should be noted that Jorgensen was actually the guy who was fended by Lowe. So we kind of, Lowe, I'm not going to say he helped him, but Lowe fended him in field, and Jorgensen come on that line to get to Jones as well. So, basically going from zero to hero, in a few steps there, Jorgensen. And I thought, of the backs for Australia, he was certainly one of the standouts. Australia then moved the ball wide in their own half before Potter puts in a decent kick, but bounce kind of betrays him. Like Keenan watches it, bounces the wrong side of the flag for Australia. It could have been an excellent kick. It was probably like a few meters outside his own 22, and to get it that close to almost going, just a couple of meters shorter on the kick, or the bounce is kicking left a little bit earlier, and it would have been an excellent kick. Unfortunately, we're going all the way back. But, Keenan, I think, was brave as well, letting that ball just bounce, because we've seen it before. If you look at who was it, Rob Howley, right, for Wasps, where ball is in, it's allowed to bounce, and then he's coming in and dots it down to score the winning try in a Heineken Cup final. So, that's the kind of thing you're playing with when you do stuff like that. But it worked out well for the Lions. Australia then, they're starting to get a bit of a foothold in the Lions half now. We have a young, lovely box kick from around about halfway to inside the 22. Jorgensen and Keenan go up together. Jorgensen kind of strips the ball away from Keenan as they're coming back down to ground. And then, Keenan falls to the ground. So he's then on his own. He's in behind and he's got the gas to go. I think it was Russell trying to chase him down. But, Russell, whatever people say about his defending or whatever, he doesn't have the gas, to catch someone like Jorgensen anyway. So in he goes for Australia's, try to get them on the board. Conversions missed is 10 points to 5. Lions then work it back into the Oz 22. Russell puts a kick pass across to Joe McCarthy on the far side, but the big lock, he can't keep it in play and knocks on. I think, a little bit more sympathy on the kick pass maybe from Russell, and it could have been a try. And I think, with the Lions as well, even though they did build up a decent lead, there were moments like that in the first half, and then they kind of compounded again in the second half where they were just a little bit off with things. And, I think if they had have, been better with that, with just that little bit more precision, you probably would have seen the scoreline kind of reflecting their dominance, especially in the first half. Lions then, they get back within 5 meters. They move the ball right to left, low, with men outside then. He goes for the line and ends up knocking the ball on. Should have been a try. Like, he should have given the pass. Like, just draw the cover and give that pass, and then the Lions were over for a try. We come back for a penalty. The Lions kick that to the corner. They go to the maul and they get held up over the line, but Australia were offside again, so it's another penalty to them. Sheen then taps and goes from the penalty. Genge with a good follow-up carry before Curry gets over to score, converted for 17 points to 5, and that ended up being a halftime score. And that's something you have to remember as well, is when we look at, because sometimes we look at highlight packages and we think, oh, well, like if they hadn't got that low try, then, there would have been, potentially 22, 24 points of 5 up at halftime. But the Lions never really left the 22 after that, because of the penalties that Australia were giving away until they scored, until they scored that try through Curry. So it's not always kind of that way, But start of the second half then, Australia, they go over the top of the line out. Curry claims it. Lions then, they work it into the 22 to within about 5 meters. Curry involved again and finds Sheehan, who goes over in the corner. That's converted by Russell from the touchdown for 24 points to 5. And that, in the end, actually proved to be a very vital score for the Lions, because they didn't really produce too much of a threat after that in terms of getting over the line. And if Australia's comeback, if they hadn't got that score and Australia had to start that comeback, without the Lions having gotten those extra 7 points, then it would have been a very different finish to the game. I think we then have a TMO review for clear up by Type Furlong. There's a shoulder to head, but referee, I think it was Gardner, right? I think it was Gardner was the referee. Basically said, there's a wrap in there, and we can see that, Sulihi, who's the guy that got hit, was actually rising up into, into the shoulder of Furlong, so it was penalty on you, and I thought that was fair. Now, if you're an Oz fan, you might think differently on that, but I can guarantee you as well, if you flip it, a lot of Lions fans who thought it was fair would be saying, no, that should have been more, should have been a yellow card or whatever. I always try to be as neutral as I can with stuff like this, but here I am sitting in the Lions shirt, so obviously I'm going to say it was a fair one. But you know, if you haven't seen me before, you have to kind of take my word for that. I'd say that, you know, I would actually call it the same way, one way or the other. But from here then, Australia, they win a scrum penalty. They go up the line, win about 10 meters. Like, definitely could have gone further, could have gone right into the corner, but the kick wasn't great. And then as they try to move it through the forwards, Byrne gets in there and turns it over in the maul. Then we have a seatbelt tackle from Curry on the edge of his own 22, and Australia kick to the corner. Again, 10 meters or so out from them, you know. And again, like, I guess it was, you know, with Lina, you know, first start, only his fourth cap, I think. And it's hard at that. Like, we've seen young 10s, like, take an example of Ireland, like, you know, we've seen Prendergast and Crowley as well, trying to get every inch out of a kick and sometimes kicking the ball dead. And, you know, there's nothing worse than, you know, your forwards think, you know, they're about to set up for a potential drive over maul try or something like that. And then suddenly having to retreat for a dropout instead. So I can see why you'd be maybe a little bit conservative, you know, without the kind of the experience of that as well. Australia then, so from here, they, you know, they go to the maul, and then the Lions are kind of shepherding the maul towards the touchline and out of play. So they decide to move it. The Lions are offside at this stage. So they then decide, you know, that going to keep the pressure on. The Lions have given away a couple of penalties already, because, like, before this we had, you know, the likes of Wilson carrying really well, and the Lions getting pinged for a penalty for offside before that as well. So it's been like a few in a row. They get a warning from Gardner, and I thought, you know, yeah, this is the time for Australia. Keep that pressure on, and if you don't get your try, you're going to get 10 minutes, you know, with an extra player anyway. So Australia, they opt for the scrum. They go off the back of the scrum. Su'Elihi comes on a nice angle. He's brought down to ground. He's dragged over the line by Bundy Aki, who was on the ball. So we have a TMO check that's involving all these different moving parts, because there's a review of whether there was, you know, both arms and a wrap in the initial tackle from the Lions, which the refereeing team said that I'm not too sure about that. You know, for that one, I would side, if you're an Australian saying, I don't think there was a full wrap there, and I don't think he used both arms, I would probably agree with you on that, honestly. But they adjudged that to be okay. Then the referee's talking about, okay, well, let's have a look at the grounding, because I think it's a try. And then they're looking at the ground and say, okay, he's got the ball down. Then it's, okay, is it a try? And then there's the whole thing of, well, how did Su'Elihi, who, like, went to ground maybe 2 meters short of the line, end up over the line? And first of all, you're thinking, well, was he pushed there by his own team? And is that going to be, you know, considered some kind of double movement or whatever? But then you see actually what happened was, Bundy Aki got over the ball, and as he's competing for the ball, he drags him over the line, and therefore Aki's trying to get the ball off him, and he's not releasing, so it's a penalty to the Lions. So eventually they come to that decision, and the Lions are able to clear. But, you know, again, if Australia had gone in there, you know, it could have been a different situation. Then we have Wilson with a, you know, nice little kick in behind, but the ball just beats Potter. You know, it was going down along the touchline, and then Potter trying to get there, and as he's trying to keep it in play, he knocks the ball on. And from here then, Australia, they get a chance. They've stuck in the Lions' defence on the edge of the 22, but then Donaldson's cross kick to Jorgensen had just a bit too much on it, back for a penalty, and they decide to kick to the corner. And, you know, you've just seen that from both teams here, was that those cross kicks that we're seeing a lot in games now, you know, when the space is there and you have somebody with the ability to put the ball into that space. Why not go for the cross kick rather than 2 or 3 passes? Because you're going to get the ball there faster and the guy's going to have more time and more space. But you're seeing that the reason why it doesn't happen all the time is because the kicks have to be so precise. And again, kick just slightly, like a few degrees off, or a little bit too much on it, and it doesn't quite go where you want it to go. So it gives you kind of, I think, a better appreciation of when these things do come off, of what a skill it is to be able to actually, give that kick pass. From here, then, they're able to kind of, from the penalty kick to the corner, they're doing pick and goes. They're edging closer and closer to the line. Then Tiziano, who I thought had a great impact off the bench, he gets over to score. He carried really well in the game. He was one guy, like first half, Australia couldn't buy gain line for love nor money. And then Tiziano off the bench really helped them in that regard. That's converted then for 24 points to 12. The Lions then back into the 22. They're upping the pace a bit. Lots of runners off 9. They win a penalty in front of the post, and then Marcus Smith pops it over for 27 points to 12. And then the final big part of the game was, Australia work it to the edge on the left. Potter steps his way through a little bit. Marcus Smith scrags him, but you can see the Lions' defence is still disorganised, trying to get themselves back into shape. But Australia, they're recycling quickly. They do it a couple of times, and then McDermott snipes over to score. That's converted for 27 points to 19. There are a couple of half chances either side as well, but no real kind of major threats to score before the full time. And that was a full time score, 27 points to 19. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the stats, and then we'll talk about, mainly the Lions players, but we'll talk about some of the, Australia players as well. So let me pull the stats up here, and now that we've had a few hours since the game, they should be nice and properly updated. Okay, so we start with tries, so 3 tries each in the game, and Australia obviously with the better of the second half, to the Lions 2 tries to 1, and the same Lions in the first half, 2-1 as well. But it didn't feel like, it wasn't really a back and forth game. It really was. The Lions went out and got to their score, and then Australia came trying to chase them down, and it wasn't enough. And it never really felt like Australia, were kind of hunting the Lions down, as it were. It just felt like they were getting closer, but it never felt like the actual result was in too much doubt. And again, that's why I come back to that Sheehan score just after half time. I think that was vital, because the Lions, that was really, other than the penalty from Smith, was their last kind of movement on the scoreboard as well. So it was very important to think that they got that at that stage. On to then, if we look at, possession territory just shows you the swing. Okay, so overall 52-48 in favour of Australia for possession, and 53-47 for territory. But if we look half to half, so first half, Lions 59% to 41 possession, and 56 to 44 in territory. So they were bossing things, but then completely flipped in the second half. Australia 64 to 36 on possession, 62 to 38 on territory. So, the Lions really struggle in that second half, and you've got to look to the bench in terms of that. I think the impact from the bench just was not good enough. And, I wouldn't be surprised if there are changes on that bench for next time as well, especially when you're looking at kind of back row options, that kind of thing, and maybe in the backs as well. We'll have to see where that comes from. Clean breaks then, 4 for Australia and 6 for the Lions, and then that's from 20 defenders beaten from Australia and 31 from the Lions. So actually, in terms of conversion, it's like 5 defenders beaten to 1 clean break for each team. So both kind of similar in that regard. Offloads then, 8 from Australia, 9 for the Lions. I thought, the offload that stood out to me was when Lowe carried and then he offloaded off the deck. I think it was the build up to maybe the Curry try. I think he did that, and then Genge carried next. I could be getting tries mixed up, but I think that's the one where that happened. Then ruck success, so 96% for Australia, 95% for the Lions. I thought Australia were very competitive at the breakdown. They certainly were trying to slow that ball down. I thought Gibson Park did a good job of getting the ball away. The Lions seem to have adapted a little bit in terms of there wasn't as much disruption as we've seen at the breakdown for the Lions in their warm-up games. So I think they did work on a little bit of kind of negating that kind of disruptive play from the Wallabies, but still you had the likes of McWright getting in there and winning a couple of turnovers, winning penalties as well for them. And I think overall probably Australia edged the breakdown in terms of just the contest overall, but I felt in terms of just smoothly moving from breakdown to breakdown, the Lions kind of had the edge there. So it really depended on whether Australia committed to to getting in there really disrupting or not. Like they weren't kind of doing it every single ruck. Then next in mauls, so Australia 2 from 3 and the Lions 3 from 3. We didn't see like the maul having a major impact on the game. I thought, for the most part, especially near the Lions, the line, not the Lions, but I felt like the defending teams are kind of on top in terms of mauls for the most part. Turnovers conceded then 13 for Australia, 17 for the Lions. So Lions definitely going to have to cut that out. But a lot of that again is down to good work from Australia, just getting in there, being disruptive. Then we look at the kick pass run. So meters run, so 301 for Australia, 422 for the Lions. And as we almost always see, the team that runs more also kicks more. So kicks from hand, 27 for Australia, 34 for the Lions. I thought the Lions' kicking game in the first half, their strategy was excellent. There was a mix of really well measured box kicks from Gibson Park. You had Finn Russell kind of scanning, putting kicks in, looking for those potential 50-22s. And then you also had, Keening putting up contestable ones. Lowe going down the line, but Lowe made a little bit off with his kicks, and I think Freeman as well. So kicking from the wing, I think, has to definitely improve for the Lions. Then in the second half, we saw the Lions kind of go away a little bit from their kicking. There was more kicking off 9, which isn't a bad thing because Gibson Park is a really good kicker. But the problem is that if you're always kicking off 9, then the other team can set up for it. I think Australia dealt with it better because of that. They didn't need to be too worried about the fact that, well, if we're trying to cover maybe a kick from 9, then we're leaving space for, the likes of Russell or Keenan or whoever to kick into. And, I think they dealt with it a lot easier then because the Lions, I don't think it was a conscious thing to say, let's change our kicking strategy. I think that's just how they kind of fell into it, where, they didn't have like the dominance in the second half that they did from their pack. And therefore there weren't the opportunities for the likes of Russell to really scan the field and be sure that the ball was coming back on their side. A lot of the time is Australia had the ball instead. So, they didn't have the phases as well. And there was a few times I felt where, players were going for offloads or trying to keep the ball alive where it wasn't on. One example would be Freeman, where he broke into the 22 and then he got tackled by 2 players and tried to offload behind the back of one of those 2 players, and it wasn't on. Ball goes forward, and it felt like the Lions just needed to reset and give the opportunity there for, I can't remember who was at halfback at that stage, but whoever the halfback partnership was there to actually properly scan and maybe, see what was really on at that stage. But then we have passes, so 184 for Australia, 141 for the Lions, and then runs 136 to 107. So it means that, Australia were making about 2.3 meters or so, or is it? Yeah, about that, right? 2.3 meters or so per carry for them, and then the Lions are making round about 4 meters per carry. So you can see that impact that the forwards have, but a lot of that again was in the first half. Second half off the bench, we weren't seeing as much. So I think the guys on the bench need to step it up, and maybe other players need to be given the opportunity to show that they can do better. Then if we look at set piece, so scrums, Australia went 8 from 8, and the Lions went 5 from 6. But I felt Australia were the better of the two scrums. I talked about it in the preview of the game as well, that this is a decent Australian front row, and it's a long time since Australia were kind of an easy team to scrummage against, even though people still have that image, I think, of them, just kind of a stereotype, right? That Australia are good at scrums and are bad at scrums, and Argentina are good at scrums. And over the last few years, it's kind of flipped, where Australia have been getting better, and Argentina, not saying that they're bad at scrums, but they haven't been at the heights that they were before, and a lot of credit has to go to, the Australian Union for that as well, for trying to develop players in there and improve that part of the game as well. And I felt like they deservedly were on top in the scrum. And, so the Lions definitely have work on there. Line out, I felt that it was 12 from 15 for Australia, 10 from 12 for the Lions. The Lions, certainly when Sheehan was on at hooker, easily the better of the two lineouts, and they caused more disruption for Australia than the other way around. And Australia were throwing over the top as well, and the likes of Curry, and I think was it Conan as well at one stage, were kind of the sharpest ones there to get to those loose balls at the back. Whereas in the second half, when Kelleher come on for the Lions, he threw over the top, and not in a planned way, a couple of times as well. So it kind of switched, I think, when the hookers changed, but overall I think that the Lions definitely were the better at the lineup. Then tackles, so Australia making 147 tackles at 83%, and the Lions 187 at 90%. So you can see in terms of defence, Lions definitely on top, and especially in that first half, they looked like they were coping very easily with what Australia were doing, and it was only that one moment of magic from Jorgensen that really got Australia in for a try. The second half then, the Lions were more on the defensive as well, so they needed to rely on that, and the fact that they made Australia work so hard for the tries that they did get in the second half, I think was a testament to how good their defence was as well. Penalties conceded then, 7 for Australia, 11 for the Lions, so Australia certainly on the right side of the referee. Lions won't be happy with that. Again, we always talk about, you want to aim for those single figures in terms of penalties conceded. So they're going to look at, obviously, the penalties that they did give away. Certainly, there was a few in the set piece, but also kind of, around the park. Things like just the right height for clear outs, tackle hikes, because we had the furlong one for that penalty. We had the seatbelt tackle by Curry as well, are little things that can be fixed, but also the, some penalties, I'm not going to say that they were good penalties to give away, but you can see why they were given away. And I'm talking about that period where, Australia were piling under pressure and the Lions were basically offside. Basically the pillars at the rucks were offside, and that's how they were keeping them out from scoring, and they kind of ate up time doing that, and Australia did eventually get in for their try through Tizano, but so not really good penalties to give away, because they almost ended up with a yellow card out of that period, but they it was one of those ones where the players obviously decided, well, if I'm not offside, that guy's getting over to score. So potentially give away 3 to save 5 or 7, would be the thinking at that stage. Or sometimes it's just you're so fatigued, there's no thinking in it at all, right? But those are our stats. So let's talk about the team. So again, we'll just talk about the stands out on the Australian side, and then we'll go down through the lines as well. So Tom Wright from fullback I thought was decent for Australia. Max Jorgensen for me was the standout back for them. He got a try, but also I thought he looked the more dangerous of the two wings. I think Potter, some of the ball he got wasn't the best quality, but I thought Jorgensen did better with this similar kind of service as well out on his wing. And then Suilihi, there was a lot of talk of the clash between the two centre pairings, and other than when he kind of almost got over for that try, it didn't have a massive impact on the game. The same with Ikitau, but that's the thing, right? If your forward pack is on top, which the Lions were, your halfbacks and your centres can really shine, and that's I think Tuipulotu and Jones kind of reaped the benefit of that in the first half. And, I think that's, rather than difference in quality, because that's a quality centre pairing there for Australia. Then I thought Lina, inexperienced definitely at 10. Jake Gordon, as well, not brilliant at 9, honestly. Even with a pack that was getting beaten up, obviously it's a tough job, but still, I thought that when we look at McDermott and Donaldson, right, that come on at 9 and 10, they just completely lifted Australia, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a switch here where Lina and Gordon are on the bench for the second test, and McDermott and Donaldson are starting. Then we look at the pack there. Front row, Slipper, Faisler, and Alatoa went really well in the scrum. Okay around the park, not really giving their team much go forward in the first half. Frost and Williams, they definitely lost the battle in the line-out, I think, and at maul time as well. The back row, we had the debutant there, champion this Crespini, I guess. Didn't really see much of him in the game. McWright, absolutely at the breakdown, real nuisance. And then Wilson, in the tight and the loose, I thought was excellent, and showed some really good footballing skills as well. Then, from the bench, I thought Angus Bell, decent, impact from him. Tizano was a real standout, and I said McDermott and Donaldson coming out in the backs as well. Callaway was decent as well when he come on. Then on to the Lions. So Hugo Keane at fullback, mostly solid. Did get stripped of the ball though for that try for Australia. So you can't just say he was imperious or whatever, because obviously he wasn't. If somebody scored a try off what is his point of difference. He did come into the line looking for the ball at times as well to help. I still think the connection between himself and Russell obviously isn't there yet, because they haven't played together that much. So again, maybe that option of bringing Kinghorn back in at full back is certainly there. I think Tommy Freeman, a little bit disappointing, because for him it's he's okay defensively. I'm not saying it's a weakness or whatever, but for him, if Keenan's point of difference is the air, Freeman's point of difference is basically his ability to score tries. Basically, that's what he is. And we didn't see enough of that from him. Obviously, in this, not enough for a threat, and potentially you could see somebody else getting a go there on the right wing. So you could see somebody like a Mac Hansen maybe coming in there. It depends, what other changes are made in that back three, if any, whether you would do something like that. Then the centres, Jones and Tuipulotu, I thought they were excellent. Kind of faded in the second half. And then Aki, I thought was good off the bench though when he come on too. So overall, I think the three centres that played were decent, and of the backs, certainly some of the standouts outside of the starting halfbacks. James Lowe then, solid defensively. Again, not a huge threat going forward, and his kicking was a little bit off as well. And if they just wanted, let's say, to bring in a try threat, you could definitely see Duhan van der Merwe coming in there instead of him. But then you then change the way the Lions want to play, because they don't really have that long kicking option anymore. So it depends really what they're looking for from their wingers, I think. Then the halfbacks, Russell, absolutely brilliant, excellent. Same with Gibson Park. There's no way they're going to get replaced for the second test. Then into the front row, Genge, I thought really struggled in the scrums, but impact around the park, I think, made up for that. So certainly, I would keep him as the starting loose head. Dan Sheehan, for me, was the standout, or certainly one of the standouts in the pack. We know he's brilliant around the park, but we talked about it recently. Like, his set pieces improved so much in about the last year or so, that he's just elevated himself to a new level, and again, brilliant today. Tyke Furlong, I thought, was decent. Maybe people would be looking at it differently if you had got a yellow card for that clear out. But yeah, he's getting those minutes in his legs now, and you can see him getting better. I think now he definitely is a standout tight head, and it wasn't his side of the scrum while he was on, at least, that was struggling. Then Itoje, really brilliant as a captain. Joe McCarthy, so good around the park. He came off fairly early in the second half though, and he wasn't really walking all that good, so he could be definitely an injury doubt for the second test, and he'd be a big miss if it was, because you're looking at then, if he's out, are you going to promote Byrne or bring Byrne into that second row, bring Chesham from the bench up to 6, and then who are you going to put on the bench? You're going to bring in a James Ryan. If you're bringing in James Ryan, then you're changing what your options are off the bench, because he's a very different player than Chesham coming off the bench. So it could have a massive impact on the Lions there, and a big shuffle as well in the team. Tyke Byrne, though, I thought was excellent. It's a long time really since I've seen him being majorly competitive over the ball, and he was in this game. Got on there, he won a couple of penalties, made it really tough for Australia as well. Then disrupting mauls and stuff like that, and even he set up a maul and turned the ball over for the Lions at one stage as well. So he had a brilliant game. Tom Curry as well. A lot of criticism of him being selected, and for me, again, I would have gone for Jack Morgan at 7 myself. But absolutely justified his selection by his performance. He got a try, but his work around the park, and just that ability as well, his sharpness to get to loose balls and stuff like that, you can't buy that, and he was brilliant, and definitely deserves to keep his spot. Jack Conan, I thought, was good there at 8 as well, just doing so many of the little things and doing it right all the time too. And I think we saw kind of the difference as well when, like, Earl, I think Earl come on at 6, right? But we weren't seeing Ben Earl making those, massive runs that are kind of his point of difference as well. So, Conan's ability to make meters as well, I think was very good. And we see it, like, he made 64 meters altogether in the game, and Earl, when he come on, 10 meters from 3 runs. So, just that ability when things tighten up, Conan can still get you that goal forward, and he certainly did that in the first half as well. And then, like, 16 from 16 tackles from Conan too. Onto the bench then, Kelleher, he made his tackles. He was decent in the loose, but set piece wasn't good enough. Definitely going to have to work on that. And, it's interesting now, you got Cowan Dickey injured, And if Cowan-Dickey wasn't injured, you might be thinking, okay, bring him in. But then like Jamie George, I think was called up, right? I don't think he's gonna kind of usurp him unless he has another, bad day at the office for a set piece as well, especially the line out in the second test. And then Andrew Porter got penalised, I think, the first scrum when he came on. And other than that, he was all right. But again, not a real standout. He made 11 or 12 tackles. Didn't really see him carrying the ball at all either. Because again, it was Australia had most of the possession at that stage. Kind of similar to Will Stewart as well. I think he did carry the ball a bit though, but not making huge meters. Checking his stats, 4 runs for 14 meters and then 9 out of 10 tackles. Yeah, so he definitely carried the ball more than Porter, but not making huge impact. But at that stage, like the Lions, they weren't pressing the game, as it were. They weren't on top. So it's decent when the other team are on top that you can at least, be getting go forward when you're carrying the ball. Then Ollie Chesham, when he come on, again, he come on for McCarthy, I think, shortly after half time. And there wasn't really like that kind of engine room. Itoje and McCarthy, I think, were a much better combination than Chesham. I really like Chesham as a player, but I don't think he had that impact off the bench to keep that momentum going in the second half. He made his tackles 15 from 15, but carrying the ball, I didn't really see him do that. And yeah, so not as maybe, as kind of ever present, as it were, like everywhere, the way that McCarthy seemed to be in that first half. Then Brenner, we talked about, not the impact that we really wanted from him when the game the game didn't loosen up as much as you might have expected though in that second half. But still, yeah, not brilliant impact off the bench, and certainly maybe opened the door for maybe different options on the bench. But again, he's a quality player, so I'm not calling for him to be off the bench. I'm just saying that other players may be considered instead. Then Alex Mitchell at 9, was decent enough, but I think at this stage, Gibson Park's game is really suiting this Lions team. Mitchell, I think, with his ability to snipe, if the Lions, had gotten in a few more positions, maybe in that second half, he could have got himself a try out of it. And then Marcus Smith, I think he was obviously on that bench because they need to cover. He wasn't on the bench to be a replacement 15. He was on the bench to cover 10 and 15. And he did come on at 10 as well, his favorite position. But I think, yeah, if you've got, Keenan at fullback, who has been, kind of plagued by illness for the last couple of weeks, then you've got to have someone that can properly slot into 15 on the bench. I think that's why he was picked over Finn Smith. He did okay when he come on, but, not really, like, again, the pack weren't doing what they were doing in the first half, so we didn't get quite the armchair ride that maybe Finn Russell did. But at the same time, I think everybody can recognise that there's a gap between, in quality between himself and Finn Russell anyway. But that's the same, I think, with any 10 you were going to pick for the Lions, whether that's in this squad or out of this squad. But he did okay when he come on, but definitely could see, if you change up who else is on the bench, or who's in the starting team, maybe, Finn Smith maybe getting the nod there. Bundyaki, I thought, in terms certainly of the backs, and overall, I think on the bench maybe had the best impact coming off the bench. Obviously that, try-saving intervention with Suyelihi, where he got over the ball and won that penalty when it looked like maybe Australia had scored a try at a vital time that could have changed the momentum coming into the championship minutes, as it were, towards the end of the game there. And, didn't seem carrying as much, certainly as Tuipulotu did in the first half. But again, Australia had more of the ball. So, but he made, for the most part, I think he was making his tackles. And when he was called on, to carry as well, he kind of made hard meters too for the team. So, But it's weird, in terms of the makeup of the bench. If for next time, if Ringrose is properly fit, I can see definitely Ringrose being on that bench, because then it changes in terms of what the options are off the bench, because Ringrose then can cover centre and he can cover wings for you. And then you don't have to be too worried about, having a player who can kind of slot into fullback, because let's say you're still playing Freeman, and Keenan, or whether it's Kinghorn or wherever goes down, then you could bring, a Ringrose onto the wing and Freeman slots back in to fullback. Not ideal, but, that's the way things happen with covering rugby. You've got to cover as many scenarios as you can. You can never cover them all perfectly. So I could see that happening, even though, again, I think Bundyaki was probably, certainly in the top two, in terms of impact off the bench. For me, probably the best impact that they got off the bench, but could be, out of the 23, depending on what happens. Because, the other thing is, if you're retaining Aki in the 23, then is it as a starter? Well, for me, it's no, because again, I thought Tuipulotu and Jones were very good in midfield, and, Aki and Ringrose are a pairing for me. So I'm not going to, if I'm the coach, I'm not replacing two guys who did really well with two guys who could play really well, but, you're taking, it's not really a risk, as it were, if you trust the players. But at the same time, if it ain't fixed, don't break it, right, is the thing. So he could see himself off the bench, not because he performed badly, just because maybe they want to see a different makeup on the bench. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the performances. For, basically the summary is, first half, Lions on top. Great go forward from their forwards, really well controlled by the halfbacks. Midfield went well. Back three, decent, but certainly not error free, and could be better. Then, the set piece, the scrum, Australia definitely had the better of the scrum overall. Line out, the Lions had the better of that, but when Keller come on, it kind of went a little bit more even. In that respect. From the bench then, not enough impact off the bench from the Lions, so we could definitely see changes on the bench from them. And then in terms of, injuries, Joe McCarthy, a potential injury for them. And then I think it was Curry as well. It was kind of, I don't know whether he was he's got a historic wrist injury or an older wrist injury. And he was kind of, when the camera was on him, he was kind of, moving his wrist around a little bit and kind of, pointing out to somebody. So I don't know whether he was feeling something there or just explaining something or whatever, but, potentially he is, another one who could be, out for the second test. And, then that just opens up, potentially lots of position changes for players as well, on what way they want to go. But overall, the Lions, they've won the first test. Now they go into the second test with the notion, or, with the knowledge that if they win the second test, then they've won the series. But Australia, and this is the thing, right? I think it's the motivation of it, is for the Lions, for them, they have two chances now to clinch the test series. Whereas for Australia, it's basically, if you don't win next week, then that's it. The series is gone. And you're only playing for pride in the last test. And the Lions are probably going to change it up completely to give players a run out, because the series is won, right? So I think the motivation for Australia is certainly going to be higher. And if they can build on that second half performance, I could definitely see them turn the Lions over. The Lions have got to get back to what they did in that first half, but get it going for, at least 60, 65 minutes of that second test. Because if Australia are closer than they were in this one, and they start taking over the way they did in the second half, or if they get a good start themselves and get a couple of tries on the board, then the Lions, they're going to have to, the guys coming off the bench, going to have to really step up their game, especially in comparison to what they did in this test. So I think it's finely poised at this stage, and still a very exciting series to watch, and really looking forward to that second test. But let me know what you think down in the comments.